The scout ship, Venthala I, had been drifting dead in space for 6 hours when its sensor officer finally found the courage to say what everyone on the bridge had been too afraid to voice. "It's real," said Navigator Ith Corvain, staring at the blue-green world hanging in her viewport like something out of a forbidden myth. "Sirius cluster relay traffic just spiked to levels we've never recorded. Every listening post between here and the Cathes Assembly homeworld is watching this exact feed right now." Captain Ryn Ossaleth didn't answer immediately. She had spent 11 years hunting for this planet across 4 galactic arms, chasing rumors that everyone in polite assembly society dismissed as fairy tales. A species so young, so improbable, that most scholars insisted it couldn't possibly be real. A world that had gone from primitive flight to interstellar contact in less than 2 centuries. A species whose broadcasts had been quietly monitored by half the galaxy for decades, studied, debated, and ultimately never approached, because no one could agree on what they actually were. "Confirm the population estimate," Ryn said quietly. 8 billion, Captain. Still expanding." Behind her, on 20 different worlds across the Assembly's territory, entertainment networks were already interrupting their broadcasts. Political councils that hadn't agreed on anything in 3 centuries were convening emergency sessions. An old, tired species called the Vethri, who had spent 500 years hiding from every predator civilization in the galaxy, watched the feed with something they hadn't felt in generations: hope. And on a warship 2 systems away, a Cathes Admiral, known for his contempt of primitive curiosities, was already plotting exactly how he intended to make first contact go very differently than the cautious scientists back home had planned. Nobody knew, in that first electrifying hour, that the entire galaxy's understanding of power was about to be rewritten by a species that hadn't even realized it was being watched. But none of this had begun that way. 3 days earlier, the Venthala I hadn't even known Earth existed. Ryn Ossaleth was, by Cathes Assembly standards, an unremarkable captain, competent, cautious, chronically overlooked for promotion, because she refused to embellish her reports with the dramatic flourishes her superiors preferred. She had spent most of her career on quiet reconnaissance missions along the Assembly's outer frontier, mapping dead systems and cataloging debris fields nobody else wanted to bother with. It was tedious work, the kind reserved for officers the Assembly didn't consider worth wasting on anything important. That was precisely why she had been the one to find the signal. It arrived as a stray radio echo bouncing off a gas giant's ionosphere. Faint, garbled, unmistakably artificial. Ryn's science officer, a meticulous and perpetually anxious researcher named Dennis Calor-Thray, had spent 9 straight hours decoding it before he understood what he was looking at. "It's music," he told her, voice shaking. "Captain, it's an actual recorded broadcast. Structured harmonics, layered instrumentation. This isn't primitive noise, this is art. And based on the drift pattern, it's been traveling for over 60 years. Where's the source?" Dennis pulled up the trajectory. The answer sat on the edge of a dim yellow star nobody in Assembly records had ever bothered naming. The Assembly had catalogued millions of star systems across its long history, and in all that time it had developed a single unshakable rule about first contact. No civilization advanced past pre-industrial technology could be approached without a formal 17-stage evaluation process, a process that took, on average, 40 years to complete. It existed to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophe that had ended 3 previous first contact attempts in disaster. Averager scouts revealing themselves to societies unprepared for the shock, entire civilizations destabilized by the mere knowledge that they weren't alone in the universe. Ryn followed the rule. She sent her report through proper channels, expecting the usual bureaucratic silence that swallowed most frontier discoveries. She did not expect the entire Assembly Council to convene within 6 hours of receiving it. That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for her. Because buried in the very same radio noise Dennis had painstakingly decoded were fragments of something far more alarming than music: military broadcasts, decades old by the time they reached assembly space, describing a species locked for most of its recorded history in relentless warfare with itself, armed with weapons capable of ending its own civilization several times over, and yet somehow still standing, still building, still reaching outward into the dark with genuine curiosity instead of despair. They should have destroyed themselves by now, said Councillor Vess Amranthil, the Assembly's most senior diplomat, studying the data with an expression Ryn had never seen him wear before. Not contempt, not the usual bored condescension reserved for younger species, but something closer to unease. Every metric we use to measure civilizational stability says this species should not exist anymore. And yet, Ryn said, they do. The Council had made a terrible mistake, though none of them recognized it yet, in assuming that humanity's survival, despite its violent history, made it dangerous rather than remarkable. Admiral Threxa Vondril of the Cathes military wing certainly saw it that way. A career officer who had built his reputation subjugating 3 border civilizations under the Assembly's protective mandate, Threxa argued forcefully that any species capable of surviving its own worst impulses was, by definition, too unpredictable to be approached with anything less than overwhelming force. Send a diplomatic envoy to a species that builds weapons to end wars, and somehow keeps choosing not to use them, Threxa said, and you're gambling the safety of this entire sector on the hope that their restraint holds. I say we do not gamble. I say we arrive prepared. Ryn, invited to the council session as the discoverer of the signal, found herself standing against a decorated war hero for the first time in her career. Admiral, everything in their broadcasts, their poetry, their music, their disaster relief transmissions, points to a species defined by more than violence. If we arrive with warships instead of open hands, we won't be testing their restraint. We'll be manufacturing the exact threat you claim to fear. The vote that followed split the council nearly in half, and for 3 tense days, the fate of first contact hung on a decision neither side fully controlled. During those 3 days, Ryn found herself unable to sleep, spending long hours in the Venthala I's observation deck replaying humanity's broadcasts on a private loop, not the military transmissions Threxa's faction fixated on, but the quieter fragments Dennis had also uncovered. Recordings of children's laughter accidentally swept up in old satellite chatter, a decades-old radio program describing distant storms with genuine tenderness for the people caught in them, a fragment of a funeral broadcast where a stranger had stood before a grieving crowd and spoken, simply, about love outlasting loss. They're not what the Admiral thinks they are, she told Dennis one night, unable to shake the feeling that the entire assembly was about to make a catastrophic misjudgment. He sees the wars. He doesn't see any of this. Maybe that's the point, Dennis said quietly. Maybe the wars are the reason all of this matters so much to them. A species that never had to fight for anything wouldn't need to grieve like that, or laugh like that, or comfort each other like that. Ryn said nothing, but she carried that thought with her into the council's final session, where she made the argument that would ultimately tip the vote. Not with military analysis, not with strategic projections, but with a simple recording of a human father reading a bedtime story to a child, a moment never meant for alien ears, broadcast entirely by accident into the vast indifferent dark. This is who we're deciding whether to fear, she told the council. I would rather be wrong about trusting them than be right about attacking them. In the end, it was neither the cautious diplomats nor the aggressive admiral who decided how the galaxy would meet humanity for the first time. It was humanity itself. Because the truth stunned the entire assembly when their listening arrays picked up something no one had anticipated. A human deep space telescope, positioned at the edge of its own solar system, had detected the Venthala I's approach 3 full days before the scout ship arrived, and instead of panic, instead of military mobilization, Earth's response had been a single, broad-spectrum transmission sent toward the incoming ship, repeated patiently across every frequency humanity's technology could reach. We see you, we are not afraid. Welcome, whoever you are. Nobody knew what to make of a species that met the possibility of alien contact. An event every assembly world treated as an existential threat, with open curiosity instead of dread. Ryn watched the message loop across her bridge display and felt something she hadn't expected. Her hands were shaking. "They knew we were coming," Dennis said quietly. "And instead of hiding, they said hello first." Admiral Threxa's warships, dispatched under emergency authorization the moment the council session ended, arrived in the outer solar system 4 hours after Ryn's scout ship. Weapons hot, formation aggressive, exactly the overwhelming show of force he had promised. What greeted them was not the desperate, disorganized species he'd expected to intimidate into submission. It was a single unarmed vessel, waiting calmly at the edge of Earth's system, broadcasting the same open invitation it had sent for days. "We see you. We are not afraid. Come speak with us." Everything changed in the next few seconds, because that was when Threxa's own tactical officer refused, for the first time in the Admiral's career, to authorize a weapons lock on an unarmed target. "Sir, with respect," the officer said, "we came here to make first contact, not commit a massacre. Look at what they sent us. This isn't a trap, this is trust." Threxa hesitated. The first hesitation of a 30-year military career built on certainty, and in that hesitation, Ryn's own vessel moved ahead of his fleet, opening a direct channel to the unarmed human ship before the Admiral could countermand her. The face that appeared on her screen belonged to an older man with tired eyes and a gentle, unguarded smile, wearing a simple civilian uniform instead of any military regalia. "My name is Commander James Osei," he said. "We've been hoping someone would answer that message for almost 40 years. Took you long enough." Ryn laughed, an unfamiliar, unguarded sound she hadn't allowed herself in years. "You have no idea how much bureaucracy it took to get here, Commander." "I believe it," James said. "For what it's worth, welcome to our system. We don't have much to offer yet, but everything we do have, you're welcome to." Behind Ryn, Admiral Threxa's fleet held its weapons locked but silent, watching a scene unfold that none of assembly military doctrine had prepared them for. A species with every reason to fear the unknown, choosing instead to greet it with open hands, disarming an entire invasion fleet not through strength, but through the simple radical act of refusing to be afraid. Across a dozen worlds in 100 languages, entertainment networks that had been broadcasting the encounter live fell silent for a long, stunned moment before erupting into something the assembly hadn't felt in generations. Not fear of a new threat, but genuine, unguarded hope for what the galaxy might become with humanity in it. Counselor Ves Amranthil, watching the exchange from the safety of the homeworld, turned to his aides with an expression of quiet astonishment. "We spent decades preparing 17 stages of protocol to protect ourselves from whatever we might find out there," he said. "It never once occurred to us that the thing we needed protecting from was our own fear." Years later, when historians across a dozen species tried to explain why humanity's first contact became the turning point that reshaped galactic diplomacy forever, they always returned to the same simple truth, the one Commander James Osei repeated in every interview for the rest of his life, until it became the closing line of textbooks, in a language he'd never even heard, the day he sent that first message into the dark. "We didn't earn the galaxy's respect by being the strongest thing out there," he said. "We earned it the day we decided not to be afraid of it." Admiral Threxa Vondrel never fully recovered his old certainty after that day. Officers who had once feared his temper noticed a change in him, a new habit of asking questions before issuing orders. When asked, years later, whether he regretted arriving at Earth with weapons drawn, his answer surprised everyone who had known him before. "I regret that it took an unarmed ship teaching me the lesson I should have already known," he said. "Strength was never the thing I should have been measuring. I know that now." Ryn Ossaleth went on to become the Assembly's first permanent liaison to Earth, a post she held for the rest of her career, and one she never once described as work. She kept, in her private quarters, a small recording of that first bedtime story broadcast, not as evidence, but simply to remember, on harder days, exactly what kind of galaxy she'd helped make possible. And on Earth, decades after that first message went out into the void, Commander James Osei's simple greeting was etched into the base of the very telescope that had first spotted the Venthala eye approaching. A permanent reminder of the moment an entire galaxy stopped to watch, and found something worth watching back.